Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. When you hear these names, what comes to mind? Tesla, Amazon, Microsoft, the giants shaping our world. But have you ever wondered who they were before all the success? They were failures. Before rockets could land themselves upright, there were Falcon 1s that exploded right on the launch pad. Before Amazon, there were forgettable projects no one remembers. Before a car empire, there was a lonely Henry Ford with 2 bankrupt companies behind him. They were broke, drowning in debt, and some were even publicly fired from the very companies they founded. So what turned these near-collapse stories into the legends who now hold the future of the planet in their hands? It definitely wasn't luck. And it wasn't just raw talent either. It was a secret. A secret you can only discover in the depths of failure, a brutal lesson that only hitting rock bottom can teach. In this video, we're not just retelling stories of failure. We're decoding the core lessons that turned career ashes into launch pads for some of the greatest empires in history. These are the secrets no business school can teach you. Let's begin. The foundation of failure. Why bankruptcy can be a gift. In our culture, failure is a scary word. It's associated with endings, weakness, and a permanent stain. We're taught to avoid it at all costs. But to the greatest minds, failure isn't a wall, it's a doorway. It's not a death sentence, but a brutal and necessary purification process. Bill Gates, co-founder of Microsoft, once said, "It's fine to celebrate success, but it's more important to heed the lessons of failure." This isn't just a nice quote. Success can lull you into complacency, trick you into thinking you're always right. Failure, on the other hand, strips everything away. It forces you to face the raw truth, your weaknesses, your flawed strategies, and your blind spots. Think of failure like a fire. It burns away the unnecessary, the arrogant ego, the faulty assumptions, the polished business plans that look good on paper but collapse in reality. What's left after the fire is the strongest core of who you are. The billionaires we're about to explore weren't strangers to failure. On the contrary, they mastered it. They failed more often on a bigger scale, and most importantly, they learned from it better than anyone else. They understood that each bankruptcy wasn't a setback, but an expensive tuition for the greatest lesson of all, the lesson of rebirth. Jeff Bezos, the father of Amazon, even built a whole culture around this idea. He once said, "I believe Amazon is the best place in the world to fail." Sounds counterintuitive, right? But that's the secret. When you stop fearing failure, you're finally free to move fast. So before we dive into their stories, let's shift our mindset. Don't see these bankruptcies as tragedies. See them as forges. Because it's inside that extreme heat that the sharpest swords are made. Their secret isn't how to avoid failure, it's how to fail the right way. Fail, learn, and come back 10 times stronger. Section 2. Billionaire story number 1. Henry Ford. The lesson of listening to the market. Before the name Henry Ford became synonymous with the automobile revolution, he was just an ambitious engineer with 2 bitter bankruptcies. His story is a classic example of one powerful lesson: you can build the best product in the world, but if no one can afford to buy it, you'll still fail. Henry Ford had a deep passion for machines. In 1896, he successfully built his first self-propelled vehicle, the quadricycle. It was an impressive piece of engineering, but in reality it was little more than an expensive toy. Fueled by belief in his vision, Ford convinced investors to back his first company, the Detroit Automobile Company, in 1899. This is where the ego of a brilliant engineer collided with the brutal truth of the marketplace. Ford was obsessed with perfection. He kept tweaking and refining in pursuit of a flawless car. But there was a fatal flaw. Perfection came at a price. The cars were too expensive to produce and way out of reach for the average consumer. Investors grew impatient. They wanted profits. They wanted cars sold. But Ford just wanted to create perfect machines. The clash reached a breaking point. After just 2 years and only 20 cars built, the company went bankrupt. Ford was forced out penniless. The first hard truth: a brilliant product on paper doesn't guarantee a successful business. Undeterred, Ford believed he needed to prove his technology was superior. He pivoted to race cars and started his second company, the Henry Ford Company. This time he saw success. His car, the Sweepstakes, won a major race with Ford behind the wheel. New investors came knocking, but history repeated itself. They wanted him to build consumer cars, but Ford was still consumed by racing glory. This time, the board took a bold step. They brought in another engineer to oversee him. Hurt and insulted, Ford left the company named after him with just $900 to his name. Ironically, that company would later be restructured into the luxury brand Cadillac. 2 failures. 2 times pushed out of his own creation. For most people, that would be the end of the road. But for Ford, it was the beginning of a critical realization. He didn't fail because he lacked talent. He failed because he was building cars for himself, not for the customer. He had ignored the most important question: what do ordinary Americans actually need? They didn't want expensive pieces of art or high-speed beasts. They needed something simple, durable, and most importantly, affordable. A vehicle that could replace a horse and take the whole family from the farm into town. That entire philosophy, forged in the fires of 2 painful bankruptcies, came to life in one legendary name, the Model T. When he founded Ford Motor Company in 1903, Henry Ford was no longer a dreamy engineer. He told his team, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it is black." This wasn't arrogance, it was efficiency. Black paint dried fastest, helping the assembly line move at top speed. He revolutionized manufacturing by introducing the moving assembly line, cutting production time from over 12 hours down to just 90 minutes. The price of the Model T kept dropping. And he did something unheard of. He paid workers $5 a day, twice the average wage, so they could afford the very cars they were building. Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, but he invented the modern auto industry. And the foundation for that revolution didn't come from textbooks. It came from the ashes of 2 failed companies. Failure taught him the most valuable lesson of all. Don't sell what you have, build what the market needs. Section 3, Billionaire Story Number 2, Walt Disney. The lesson of intellectual property and calculated risk. If Henry Ford's story is about product-market fit, Walt Disney's journey is an epic about creativity, ownership, and the courage to bet everything on a dream. Before the name Disney became a symbol of magic, it was tied to bankruptcy, betrayal, and the heartbreak of losing his first beloved creation. Walt Disney started with a passion for drawing. After being fired from a Kansas City studio for lack of imagination, he decided to strike out on his own. In 1920, he launched his first company, Laugh-O-Gram Films. They created short animated fairy tales full of creativity, but a financial disaster. Disney focused too much on the art and lacked business sense. Deep in debt, the company went bankrupt. He was so broke he had to sleep in his office. That was his first failure, a painful lesson in financial management. With just a few dollars in his pocket, Disney boarded a train to Hollywood to start over. There, with his brother Roy, who had a better head for business, he launched Disney Brothers Studio. This time, things started looking up. They created a new character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, a mischievous little bunny. Distributed by Charles Mintz, Oswald quickly became a hit. Disney finally tasted success, but his harshest lesson was yet to come. When the contract was about to expire, Disney traveled to New York to negotiate for a bigger cut. But he walked into a trap. Mintz not only refused the raise, but dropped a bombshell: he had secretly signed most of Disney's animators to a new deal. And worse, a small clause in the contract gave full rights to Oswald, not to Disney, but to the distributor. Mintz gave an ultimatum: accept a lower salary and work for him, or walk away with nothing. It was a brutal betrayal. Disney lost everything once again: his company, his team, and this time even the very character that had brought him success. On the long train ride back to California, drowning in despair, Disney could have given up. But in that darkest moment, a spark was lit. From the pain of loss came an unshakable resolve, a lesson learned in blood and tears. Never ever give up ownership of what you create. And on that train, with just a few scribbles, a new character was born. One that Disney would own outright. One that would change entertainment forever. A little mouse, originally named Mortimer, later renamed, thanks to his wife's suggestion, to something warmer, Mickey. Mickey Mouse was Walt Disney's rebirth. and he made a bold move. He decided to produce an animated film with synchronized sound, a cutting edge, and expensive gamble. To finish Steamboat Willie, he sold his car and went deep into debt. When Steamboat Willie premiered in 1928, it caused a sensation. Mickey Mouse became a global phenomenon. But Disney didn't stop there. That lesson in calculated risk continued to guide him. When everyone believed animation was only for short films, he bet the entire company on the world's first full-length animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. All of Hollywood called it Disney's folly, convinced no one would sit through a 90-minute hand-drawn film. They were wrong. Snow White became a massive hit and ushered in the golden age of animation. Walt Disney's story teaches us two core lessons. First, intellectual property is everything. Your creations are your most valuable assets. Second, failure teaches you how to take smart risks. Those hard-won lessons didn't break him. They turned him into a calculated gambler with an unshakable belief in quality. Section 4, Billionaire Story Number 3. Steve Jobs. A harsh lesson in ego and rebirth. Among the greatest comeback stories of all time, Steve Jobs stands in a league of its own. His journey was one of deep personal transformation. His biggest failure wasn't a product, it was being publicly fired from the very company he founded, Apple. In the early 1980s, Steve Jobs was Silicon Valley's golden boy. Alongside Steve Wozniak, he built Apple from a garage startup into a $2 billion company. He was the embodiment of creativity and bold vision, but also infamously difficult to work with. He was controlling, impatient, and often hurtful toward colleagues. His ego was as big as his talent. In 1983, Jobs famously recruited John Sculley, a marketing executive from Pepsi, to become Apple's CEO. He pitched him with the legendary question, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" But cracks soon appeared. Jobs' visionary plans for the Macintosh clashed with Sculley's more pragmatic business approach. Tensions rose. Jobs attempted a boardroom coup and failed. The board, already exhausted by Jobs' behavior, sided with Sculley. And so in 1985, at just 30 years old, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. "I was very publicly out," he later said. "What I had been working for my entire adult life was gone." This wasn't just a career setback, it was a public humiliation. The founder and soul of Apple had been kicked out by the very person he had brought in. In the months that followed, Jobs felt lost. But then he came to a realization: the pressure of maintaining his genius image was gone. He was free to start again. "I didn't see it then, but getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have happened to me," he said. "It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life." This desert period lasted over a decade. He founded two companies. The first was Next, which built high-end computers. Next wasn't a commercial hit, but it taught Jobs how to build a company from scratch this time, with a focus on creating a superior operating system. More importantly, he began learning how to lead a team without relying solely on dominance. The second company he bought was a small graphics studio called Pixar. Under his leadership, Pixar revolutionized animation with Toy Story. At Pixar, Jobs had to embrace a completely different lesson. He wasn't a filmmaker, so he had to learn to trust and empower the creatives. He discovered the value of collaboration. The 12 years away from Apple transformed Steve Jobs. He left as a brash young genius. He returned as a mature leader shaped by failure and humility. In 1997, Apple was on the verge of collapse. In a twist of fate, they acquired Next, and with it brought Steve Jobs home. His return sparked one of the greatest corporate comebacks ever. He used Next's operating system as the foundation for Mac OS X. He applied storytelling techniques learned at Pixar to craft revolutionary products: the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad. Steve Jobs' story is a lesson in ego. Failure didn't destroy him, it redeemed him. It shattered his arrogance and rebuilt him into a leader who could inspire others, who understood that a great legacy isn't built by one person, but by a team united around a shared dream. Section 5, Billionaire Story Number 4, Elon Musk. The lesson of big failure and all-in risk management. If the previous stories were lessons from the past, Elon Musk's journey is a high-stakes action thriller of our time. His story redefines the concept of risk. Musk didn't just face the collapse of one company, he stared down the possibility of losing both of his companies in the same week. After selling PayPal and walking away with around $180 million, Musk could have retired. But instead, he bet everything, his fortune and his reputation, on two seemingly impossible missions: revolutionizing cars with electric vehicles, Tesla, and conquering space with reusable rockets. SpaceX. Friends tried to talk him out of it. Some even made a compilation video of exploding rockets to convince him to drop his insane ideas. Then came the true hell of 2008. The world was in a financial meltdown. At SpaceX, the first 3 Falcon 1 launches had all ended in failure. They had just enough money and parts left for one last try. If it failed, SpaceX was finished. Meanwhile, at Tesla, things weren't any better. The company was struggling to produce its first Roadster model. Technical problems piled up, costs soared, and cash was running dangerously low. The media began counting down the days until Tesla's collapse. Musk later described 2008 as the worst year of my life. He faced an impossible decision: use his remaining funds to save one company or split it and risk losing both. Recalling that time with tears in his eyes, he once said, "I gave money to both. That might have been foolish. It's like having 2 kids and only enough food for one. What do you do?" The pressure was unimaginable. He worked over 100 hours a week, slept on couches, and was going through a divorce. He had to borrow money from friends just to cover personal expenses. And yet, this is where Elon Musk's core lesson was forged: extreme resilience and the ability to make clear, rational decisions under crushing pressure. On September 28, 2008, SpaceX launched Falcon 1 for the 4th time. The rocket lifted off, and this time it didn't explode. It reached orbit, making SpaceX the first private company in history to do so. That single success saved the company. Just months later, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract. Meanwhile, just days before Christmas 2008, Tesla had only enough cash for a few more days. In the final hours, Musk managed to convince investors to fund the company, and he poured in the last of his own money. Tesla survived just hours from bankruptcy. Elon Musk's failures were failures at the edge of innovation. When you attempt what's never been done, failure is inevitable. Musk put it bluntly: failure is an option here. If you're not failing, you're not innovating enough. His secret wasn't in avoiding failure. It was in building systems strong enough to withstand it. He stared total failure in the face and didn't blink. And that unshakable grit helped forge one of the greatest legends of our time. Section 6. Unlocking the secret. So what in the end is the secret behind these once bankrupt billionaires? It's not a single formula, it's a set of principles forged in the fires of adversity. From Henry Ford, we learn the first secret: the humility to listen. Failure forces you to take off the mask of a genius inventor and put on the ears of a servant to create what the market truly needs. From Walt Disney, we learn the second secret: the power of ownership and calculated risk. Failure teaches you to protect your intellectual property, like your life depends on it, and gives you the courage to bet on it wisely. From Steve Jobs, we learn the third secret: the transformation of ego. Failure is the bitter medicine that cures arrogance, turning a lone genius into a true leader who understands the value of a team. And from Elon Musk, we learn the final secret: unbreakable will in the face of extreme risk. Failure in pioneering fields is inevitable. The secret isn't in avoiding the fall, it's in being able to take hit after hit and still rise for the final battle. Put it all together, and here's the ultimate truth: billionaires don't see failure as an enemy. They see it as a teacher. They have an extraordinary ability to extract wisdom from pain. While most people are paralyzed by failure, they use the energy of the fall to launch themselves even higher. Whatever failure you're facing today, big or small, it's not the end. It's a lesson designed just for you. Maybe it's teaching you to listen more, to stay humble, or to test just how strong your will really is. The secret isn't whether you fall. Everyone falls. The real secret is what you learn on the way down and how you rise when it's over. Which lesson from these stories resonated with you the most? Have you ever experienced a failure that, looking back, you're now grateful for? Share your story and the lesson you learned in the comments, because every story shared is a spark of inspiration for us all. If these secrets brought you value, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because this journey of discovering life-changing stories is just getting started. Thank you for watching. And remember, your next stumble might just be the launch pad for your greatest success.